I was able to play over 30 hours of Dragon Dogma 2 thanks to an early code from Capcom, and I am nowhere near ready for this adventure to end. This game takes some pretty big risks in its combat, quest and open world design that in my opinion really pay off. This all leads to Dragon Dogma 2 feeling like a much needed breath of fresh air in the genre, one that I hope inspires other studios to try some of the things Capcom did for their game. Let's start at the beginning though, because you play as the Arisen, a pretty important character in the world of Dragon's Dogma. A giant ancient dragon is threatening both the human kingdom of Vermont and the Beastren Empire of Batal, and the catch is you as the Arisen are the only one who can kill it. But with you having no memory of even becoming an Arisen and someone posing as the potential Dragon Slayer on the throne of the human kingdom, the situation is complicated to say the least. Luckily, you don't have to strike out on your own, as one of your special powers as the Arisen is to call upon the help of pawns. These manifest themselves as your NPC party members and will really help you out on your quest to slay the dragon. They can definitely fight, but they will also help you traverse the world by guiding you towards quest locations or nearby points of interest. And this will definitely come in handy, as Dragon's Dogma 2 has very little in the way of handholding, meaning you are naturally more guided to explore using your own eyes rather than following map markers, since those aren't really there. So it falls in the Elden Ring and Breath of the Wild school of exploration, where you can just let curiosity guide you and you know you'll find something amazing. The map is filled with monsters to fight, materials to harvest and caverns and dungeons to explore, so you rarely get the feeling you're wasting your time. And the game kinda had to get this right, because most of your time is spent traveling through the open world with your party members. Dragon's Dogma 2 namely has very little in the way of fast travel. There are fast travel points known as port crystals, but they are few and far between. Your other option is an ox cart, but those only travel to a specific destination like a neighboring town or city. So most of the time you're just walking on foot, taking in the green hills and valleys of Vermont or the desert sands of Batal, with a high chance of you walking into an ambush that leads to a fight against goblins or bandits. And I actually found that less fast travel meant that I got to know and appreciate the map a lot better. While it's nowhere near the massive size of something like Assassin's Creed Valhalla, you are forced to take in the entirety of the map, and because of this it feels much bigger. And travel is never boring, because you will encounter many giant monsters like cyclopses hiding in the woods, and the map is repopulated with enemies very regularly too. So while you can choose to run away and ignore them, I would often choose to fight instead, as combat is definitely the highlight of the game for me. I will say though, it takes a little bit of getting used to, because like the open world, a lot of the handholds we've come to rely on aren't really there. There is no lock-on system, so you need to manage your camera to keep track of enemies. Your melee attacks also don't automatically hone in on nearby targets, so even hitting an enemy requires good timing and positioning. But the trade-off is that every hit you do get in feels that much better. Especially when playing with a slow weapon like a greatsword, hitting your big swings feels so damn satisfying every time, because you know you earned that hit. And positioning is the name of the game when it comes to defense too, as the dodge and block and parry options we've become accustomed to from recent action games are tied to separate classes, which means most of the time your best option is to run out of the way of an attack. So yeah, there's a lot of tactical depth to the base combat mechanics, but it becomes even more interesting when we take a look at the game's class system. There are 10 classes, or vocations as the game calls them, in Dragon's Dogma 2, which offer access to a wide variety of playstyles and archetypes. Even similar looking classes like Mage and Sorcerer play out quite differently, with mages having access to a huge list of support abilities that can buff their allies and keep them alive. Meanwhile, the Sorcerer only has access to damage dealing spells, which only cost stamina to cast in this game. And while stamina regenerates over time, the Sorcerer gives you a special ability to regenerate it quicker, so you can blast as many spells at your opponents as possible. And you are not tied to a single class either, you can freely swap them out at various locations on the map and level each one to the max on a single character. For me, this is a huge reason to keep playing, because every class I've played so far has been so damn fun that I want to master it before I move on to the next. I've mostly been focusing on the martial classes like the fighter and warrior, but I also love the hybrid mystic spearhand and their elegant moves and combos. And after getting the hang of it, misdirecting enemies while letting my allies do the work as the trickster has also become a very fun playstyle that I can't wait to dive more into. And we'll make sure to have a class guide up on the channel to show you how to unlock these soon, so subscribe to not miss it and leave a like if you enjoyed the video so far. But yeah, unlocking and leveling new classes has been the most rewarding thing in the game for me so far, and since leveling only happens through combat, it's also also an extra reason to pick a fight with every monster I can. But you have to think about more than just your vocation, as the pawns I mentioned earlier also have access to most of the vocations you do. Another cool thing about pawns is that they are made by, well, us, the players. During character creation, you create your own playable character, but also one main pawn, whose look is completely customizable, and you can also pick, change, and upgrade their vocation just like your own. But to round out the party, you need to head to a Riftstone and recruit 2 support pawns, which are actually the pawns created by other players. And picking your party members adds yet another layer of strategy and depth to the game, as the right pawn can really help you out a ton. I already mentioned them being able to guide you to a quest location, but in combat you want to make sure you pick one with the right skills to supplement your party, so have someone to tank if you're playing DPS for example. And special pawn skills can even help with things like resource gathering, like the forager skill that just marks gathering spots on my map. Since only your main pawn levels from experience, you're constantly swapping out support pawns, bringing new skills to the party to keep the gameplay varied. And there's even some smart social interaction, as you can give a pawn a gift when you send them back, which will be granted to their owner. So a really clever system, and I have to say, no matter which pawns I had in my party, they definitely hold their weight as some of the most useful AI party members in the game. The only downside to this system is that their dialogue can become pretty repetitive. This is something the devs stated they'd work on before launch, but even still, I've lost count of how many times my pawn mentioned that no one in the party has the same vocation. Still, that's a minor issue with what's otherwise a very unique and well-working system. And you'll definitely need the help against some of the creatures the game throws your way. There is decent enough variety in the smaller enemy types, from goblins and flying harpies to lizardmen and packs of wolves. But these enemies are often recycled for later areas of the map in the form of variants with new types of elemental attacks and resistances. But the cool thing about Dragon Dogma 2 is that the fights against bigger creatures are very different, and even after 30 plus hours of playtime, I still feel excited when one of these monsters shows up. Fighting a Cyclops or a Minotaur often feels like a mini boss fight, and the fact that you are able to mount and climb these creatures to topple them so you can deal big damage makes them even more engaging. Again, the environment can really help with this, as you can use a ledge to drop onto a monster's back for example, and you'll need to make the most out of your various skills as well. But as you encounter these creatures more often, you'll get accustomed to their moves and get better at exploiting their weaknesses. Which means the focus shifts from survival to just having fun and trying to bring your enemies down as quickly and skillfully as possible. Again, I still drop everything and run towards danger when I hear a big monster in my vicinity. That should tell you enough about how much fun these fights are. What's also great is how dynamic these fights make the world. And I don't just mean the fact that a griffin can come swooping in while you're fighting a different creature. These creatures also influence the world around them, as they can attack traveling ox carts or even wander into a city and attack the local townsfolk. And because NPCs can actually die, including quest givers and other major NPCs, it's really in your best interest to keep the people alive. So when I got back to the city of Batal and saw that a chimera had wandered in, I couldn't just run to a bed and rest hoping it would leave. I had to gang up with the local guard to keep the citizens safe. Vice versa, you can also turn people against you if you don't heed their requests or warnings. Normally, when a game tells you shouldn't do something, you usually can't. But when Jordan got challenged to a 1v1 duel and called his pawns in to help, they actually did, which resulted in the character that had set up the duel being pretty upset with him. So your actions, or lack of actions in some cases, lead to real results, which helps to make you feel part of the world even more. Now, all this praise doesn't mean the game is without its issues, but I found that none of these got in the way of my enjoyment. Sure, the lack of a lock-on can lead to some weird camera angles, especially against some of the bigger creatures. The lack of readily available fast travel can cause for a decent amount of backtracking, and that's not even mentioning the fact that some monsters can just throw you off a cliff, so you have to plan an entirely new route. But most of these annoyances come from the unique approach to game design Capcom have chosen for Dragon Dogma 2, and I think none of these systems work as well without their inconveniences. The couple of times my camera got stuck at a weird angle are more than worth it for how good it feels to smack someone with a greatsword in this game. And while backtracking can be obnoxious, it does help you learn and appreciate the map, plus the lack of fast travel also makes the nights feel truly terrifying. When it gets dark, you can only see your direct environment, and brand new and more challenging enemies will also spawn to make your life even harder. So that's another aspect that makes adventuring through this open world so surprising and exciting. One thing I do want to mention before I give you my final thoughts is the game's performance, as I know it's been been a point of discussion before launch. I can of course only report my own experiences on PS5 and those have mostly been fine. Sure, the frame rate takes a noticeable hit when multiple big spells are dropped, but it felt relatively consistent outside of that. No issues when loading into new areas, which is especially impressive considering how far you are often able to see. And none of it is set dressing either, as that city in the distance is one you can visit if you keep heading in that direction. Overall, the performance is good at best, and even at its worst, it didn't get in the way of my enjoyment. Dragon Dogma 2 is a very special game because it brings some fresh new ideas to the open world genre. While these new ideas can sometimes lead to tedious or annoying situations, those are few and far between, and they are more than made up for by the awesome moments that can only happen in a game like this. Especially the dynamic combat encounters in the open world have led to some very memorable fights and moments that are truly unique to my playthrough. If you have any questions, totally drop them down below. We will be streaming the game, which you can watch by clicking on the screen. Subscribe for way more videos on Dragon Dogma 2, a like would be appreciated, and I will see you in the next one. Goodbye!